If you ever visit the town of Junee in southwestern New South Wales, you can expect to find many things to catch your interest. You can appreciate a bit of history at its railway museum, or perhaps sample some chocolate at its chocolate factory, and even gaze at the statue of NRL commentating legend Ray Warren. Perhaps the most eye-catching thing of all, though, is Monte Cristo Homestead. A Victorian-styled house perched atop a hill, Monte Cristo is undoubtedly a beautiful piece of architecture. A passing glance at this grand estate would never lead you to believe its claims of being Australia's most haunted house. There are tales of spectral figures and whispers in the night, as well as flickering lights and eerie orbs, all caused by those who died there in tragic circumstances. But just how much of Monte Cristo's sad history can actually be confirmed? And where does fact become folklore? Monte Cristo's story begins with the Crawley family. After being married in 1862, Christopher and Elizabeth Crawley moved to Junee, where they struggled to make ends meet. Their fortunes would start to change in 1877, when Christopher built a hotel that serviced local railway workers. When the Great Southern Railway opened up in the following year, more people than ever before began visiting the town, increasing its riches and those of the Crawleys. They became one of the wealthiest families in all of Junee and decided it was time that they lived like it. So in 1885, the Crawleys built a new home for themselves and their 7 children. They named it Monte Cristo and employed many maids to tend to its upkeep. Life was good for the Crawleys, but their happiness would not last. Christopher Crawley died in 1910 from blood poisoning, brought on by an infected boil on his neck. He was 69 years old. Christopher left all of his estate, estimated to be valued at over £46,000, to his wife Elizabeth. After her husband's death, Elizabeth became withdrawn and apparently only left Monte Cristo twice before her own death in 1933, at the age of 92. All of the Crawley children would leave Monte Cristo by 1948, and though it did have caretakers, nobody would live there again until the Ryan family purchased it in 1963. The Ryans restored Monte Cristo and began operating it as a tourist attraction, allegedly haunted by numerous ghosts. The most frequent ghost stories at Monte Cristo surround Mr and Mrs Crawley themselves. Mr Crawley's bearded visage can supposedly be seen by guests, and he is relatively benign for a long-deceased person. Mrs Crawley is said to be much more aggressive and looks upon disrespectful guests with anger. In addition to the Crawleys, there are numerous other stories of deaths and spirits at Monte Cristo. There's the maid who is rumoured to have committed suicide by flinging herself over a balcony after discovering that she was pregnant. You may also know the legend of Harold Steele, a young man with mental issues who was chained up like an animal for decades before being committed to an asylum where he died. A caretaker known as Jack Simpson is rumoured to have been murdered at Monte Cristo in 1961, shot by a young boy who had just seen the film Psycho. There's also a stable boy named Morris who died in a fire while sick in bed. It's suggested that the fire may have been deliberately lit. Perhaps the saddest tale out of Monte Cristo's past is the death of a baby girl, whose cries are said to echo through the halls to this day. The baby died after being dropped down the stairs by a maid carrying her. Some even say the maid was pushed by an invisible force. Except for Mr and Mrs Crawley, finding information about those rumoured to haunt Monte Cristo can be difficult. You cannot even find a name for the maid who allegedly jumped to her death. But you can find a bleach stain on some steps, said to have been left behind when other maids scrubbed away the bloody aftermath of the incident. Looking into the stories of Harold Steele and Jack Simpson, it's hard to find out if they ever even existed. Jack's death would have easily made the headlines in the 1960s, but nothing can be found about him. Not a lot can be discovered when looking into Morris the Stable Boy's story either. There aren't any reports about fires or accidental deaths from them at Monte Cristo, and some versions of his story claim that his full name was Ralph Morris. Though you can't find newspaper articles about him, you can find a Ralph Morris from Junee listed on the New South Wales Births, Deaths and Marriages website. The identity of the baby who allegedly haunts the halls of Monte Cristo is even more perplexing. Some accounts say the baby was an infant daughter of the Crawleys, while others suggest it was their granddaughter. The baby's name also changes from Magdalene to Ethel, depending on where you hear the story. There is an Ethel in the Crawley family tree though. One of the Crawley children had a baby daughter named Ethel, who sadly died in 1917 at just 10 months old. Perhaps young Ethel could be the source of rumours of a baby haunting Monte Cristo. Though there may not be ghosts at Monte Cristo, it hasn't stopped tourists and ghost hunters alike from visiting. A person can even stay the night and judge Monte Cristo's haunted reputation for themselves. And whether you experience something unusual or not, you're still bound to have a good story to tell.